dust choked our lungs, and the screams of the dying echoed through the shattered concrete bunkers. We had accepted our extinction. The interstellar government had abandoned us to the slaughter. We closed our eyes, waiting for the end. Then the atmosphere tore open and hellfire rained down. Blood has a distinct metallic scent, one that permeates the air filters of a sealed bunker and coats the back of your throat. For 72 hours, that was the only thing I could smell. My name is Ariston. I was the chief engineer of the New Alexandria mining colony on Aegis 7, a rock, floating at the very edge of the outer rim. We were supposed to be an investment, a joint venture by heavily subsidized Earth corporations to extract heavy metals. We had families here, schools, hydro farms, and a thriving local economy. But when the sky turned a bruised, sickly purple, and the chitinous swarm, a xenomorphic hive mind we simply called the Krell, descended, we realized just how little a balance sheet meant to the bureaucrats back home. We sent out the distress signals immediately. Thomas, our lead communications officer, had bypassed the standard commercial relays, hacking directly into the military-grade encrypted channels using a cracked Raytheon deep space transponder. We begged the United Earth Directorate for naval support. We pleaded with the corporate fleet. The response was an automated transmission distress signal received. Sector quarantined. Hold position. Relief forces are unavailable due to overwhelming theater demands. May God be with you. They had written us off. A colony of 40,000 men, women, and children abandoned to balance a tactical ledger. The siege of New Alexandria was not a battle. It was an execution. The Krell did not use conventional ships or drop pods. They hurled organic spores from orbit, massive, fleshy meteors that slammed into our titanium-reinforced domes, bursting open to release millions of insectoid nightmares. They stood 8 feet tall, armored in obsidian carapaces that deflected standard small arms fire, wielding biological scythes that could shear through a blast door. We fought back with what we had. It wasn't much. Our security detail was equipped with outdated cult-manufactured magnetic sidearms and surplus riot gear. As the chief engineer, I ordered my teams to weaponize our industrial equipment. We programmed Caterpillar heavy-duty trench diggers to charge blindly into the Krell lines, their spinning, diamond-tipped drills shredding alien flesh before the machines were inevitably overwhelmed and torn apart. We jury-rigged mining explosives to our perimeter walls, detonating our own infrastructure just to buy an extra hour of life. It wasn't enough. By the 3rd day, the 40,000 colonists had been reduced to barely 3,000. We were backed into Sector 4, the deepest subterranean refinement facility on the grid. Above us, the sounds of the colony dying filtered down through the ventilation shafts. The metallic tearing of bulkheads, the screeching of the Krell, and the sudden, terrifying silence that always followed a breach. Sarah, our head medic, was operating on a makeshift table built from stacked supply crates. Her medical scrubs were saturated with gore. She was working frantically to cauterize the severed leg of a young miner named Gibson, using a modified industrial welding torch because we had run out of medical-grade coagulants 12 hours ago. Ariston tore. Thomas called out from the communications console, his voice trembling. He didn't look up from his monitors. The blue light of the screens illuminated the tear streaks, cutting through the soot on his face. Perimeter sensors are going dark. Array Alpha is gone. Bravo is gone. They're in the upper access tunnels. How long? I asked, racking the bolt of my heavy rivet rifle. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the stock. 10 minutes, Thomas whispered, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were hollow, completely devoid of hope. Maybe less. The blast doors at level 2 are buckling. They're using some kind of acid. I looked around the cavernous refinement chamber. Thousands of terrified civilians huddled in the shadows. Mothers clutching crying children. Old men gripping rusted pipes with white-knuckled desperation. This was the end of the line. There were no more fallback points, no more tunnels, no more miracles. Divert all remaining auxiliary power to the primary blast doors. I ordered, my voice sounding hollow and foreign to my own ears. Sarah, distribute the pain stims. Anyone who is critical, make them comfortable. Don't let them wake up when the door falls. Sarah stopped working. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and gave a single slow nod. She understood. We all knew what the cruel did to the captured. Death was a mercy. The ground shuddered. Dust and debris rained down from the cavern ceiling. A deafening metallic groan echoed through the chamber as the massive 2-foot-thick titanium blast door at the entrance of our bunker began to bulge inward. Thud. The sound was like a hammer striking an anvil inside my skull. Thud. The metal began to glow red in the center, hissing as a highly corrosive bioacid ate through the locking mechanisms. The colonists began to scream, scrambling backward, pressing themselves against the cold stone of the cavern walls, as if they could somehow phase through the rock. "Guns up!" I screamed, stepping forward, leveling my rivet rifle at the buckling door. Beside me, a dozen surviving security officers and miners raised their weapons. A pathetic firing line of exhausted, broken humans preparing to spit in the face of the abyss. Thud. The center of the door gave way, a massive, jagged hole melting outward. A Krell warrior thrust its horrific, multi-jawed head through the gap, screeching a sound that shattered the remaining glass in the observation booths. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't pray to God. I didn't curse the government. I just waited for the darkness to take me. But the darkness never came. The screech of the Krell was suddenly drowned out by a sound that defied description. It wasn't an explosion. It was an apocalyptic, atmosphere-shattering roar like the sky itself was tearing in half. The ground didn't just shudder, it violently convulsed. The Krell warrior, trying to force its way through our blast door, was suddenly sucked backward, ripped away, as if pulled by an invisible godly hand. Then came the shockwave. It traveled down the access tunnels and hit our bunker with the force of a hurricane. The remaining blast doors blew completely off their hinges, flying over our heads and smashing into the refinement machinery. We were thrown to the ground, ears bleeding, lungs gasping for air that had suddenly been superheated. "What was that?" Thomas screamed, clutching his bleeding ears. "The reactor," Sarah yelled back. "Did the main reactor blow?" "No." Thomas scrambled back to his shattered console, wiping dust from the sole surviving monitor. "The reactor is offline." That came from above. From orbit. I pulled myself up, groaning, as my bruised ribs protested. I staggered to the ruined entrance of the bunker and looked up the massive, sloping access tunnel that led to the surface. The sky, once choked with the purple smog of Krell spores, was bleeding brilliant, blinding orange. "Orbital strike," I whispered in disbelief. "Who?" Thomas asked, frantically typing. "The Earth Directorate Fleet. Did they come back?" "No." Thomas stared at his screen, his jaw hanging slack. "The transponders. They aren't military. They aren't UN. They're—" He swallowed hard. "Ariston, look at the orbital feed." I stumbled over to the console. The external camera feeds, previously blocked by Krell jamming, were suddenly crystal clear. The Krell swarm on the surface, millions of them swarming our ruined city, had stopped. They were looking up. Streaking down from the heavens were hundreds of glowing, incandescent lines. They weren't missiles. They were massive, solid tungsten telephone poles dropped from orbit. kinetic bombardment, the legendary rods from God. I watched the screens as the first rod impacted the center of the Krell staging ground. There was no fireball, no chemical explosion, just pure, unadulterated kinetic energy. The ground liquefied. A crater the size of a football stadium instantly formed, sending a wave of pulverized rock and shattered Krell chitin rippling outward for miles. The atmosphere ignited, vaporizing thousands of the monsters in a microsecond. Before the dust could even begin to settle, the second wave hit the atmosphere. Not kinetic rods this time. Drop pods, hundreds of brutal, ugly hexagonal metal boxes glowing white-hot from atmospheric re-entry. They didn't have parachutes. They didn't slow down. They fired massive retro thrusters at the very last second, slamming into the ground with enough force to crack the bedrock. One of the pods crashed directly into the courtyard of the surface refinement facility, right above our bunker. The feed caught it perfectly. The pod hissed, venting superheated steam. On its side, blistered but legible, was a logo. It wasn't the dove of the United Earth Directorate. It was a faded, heavily stenciled eagle, grasping a lightning bolt, flanked by bold block letters. Lockheed Martin. Blackbridge Division. Tactical Repossession. Blackbridge. I muttered, my blood running cold. Every colonist knew the rumors. Blackbridge wasn't a military force. They were a private military contractor, a ghost-tier PMC, hired by the interstellar banks. They didn't fight wars for flags or freedom. They fought for corporate assets. The explosive bolts on the drop pod blew outward, decapitating a charging Krell warrior. Heavy steel ramps slammed down. From the billowing steam, a nightmare emerged. It was a human, but barely. He was encased in 8 feet of heavily scarred matte black mechanized power armor. The suit was brutalist in design, prioritizing thick, angled, ablative plating over sleek aesthetics. The helmet was a faceless visor of glowing crimson. The soldier stepped out the ground, cracking under the sheer weight of the armor. In his hands, he carried a weapon that belonged on the nose of a fighter jet, a General Dynamics M89 rotary rail cannon. A swarm of a dozen Krell warriors recovering from the shockwave shrieked and charged the lone human. They crossed the distance in seconds, their scythes raised to carve him apart. The human didn't flinch. He didn't seek cover. He simply planted his massive mechanical boots into the dirt, braced the rail cannon against his hip, and pulled the trigger. The sound was a continuous, deafening brrrrt, like canvas tearing, only amplified 1,000 times. A stream of hypersonic depleted uranium slugs tore through the air. The Krell weren't just killed, they were unmade. The kinetic force of the rounds hit them so hard, their carapaces shattered into a fine mist of green blood and black shrapnel. The sheer overpressure of the weapon firing kicked up a storm of dust around the soldier. More pods were landing, dozens of them. Heavily armored humans poured out, forming a tight, disciplined perimeter. They didn't shout. They didn't scream battle cries. They moved with a terrifying, silent, predatory efficiency. "They're butchering them," Thomas whispered, watching the feeds in absolute awe. "The Krell. They're retreating." It was true. The hive mind, previously relentless and fearless, was experiencing something it had never encountered before: overwhelming, industrialized human violence. The Krell were breaking against the Blackbridge mercenaries, like water against a seawall. Above us, the heavy clanking of mechanized footsteps echoed down the access tunnel. The survivors in the bunker panicked, backing away from the melted blast doors, raising their meager weapons. "Hold your fire!" I screamed, stepping to the front. "Hold your fire!" Through the smoke and the jagged opening of the bunker, a massive armored figure appeared. It had to duck to fit through the melted hole. The hydraulic servos in its suit whined as it stepped into the dim light of the cavern. The crimson visor scanned the room, lingering on the terrified civilians, the makeshift triage center, and finally on me. The soldier reached up, engaging a release valve on his collar. With a hiss of pressurized air, he pulled the heavy helmet off. "You the guy in charge of this dirt farm?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, carrying a thick, unmistakable Midwestern drawl. I am Ariston," I stammered, lowering my rivet rifle. "Chief Engineer. Who are you? Did Earth send you?" The man let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He hooked his helmet to his belt and rested his massive rail cannon on his shoulder. "Name's Captain Knox," he said, pulling a crumpled plastiglass datapad from a compartment on his chest plate. "Earth doesn't give a damn about you, Ariston, and neither do I." He tossed the datapad. It clattered against my boots. "Your corporate overlords defaulted on their planetary insurance policy." Knox said, his tone entirely businesslike, as the sounds of Krell being exterminated echoed from the surface. "My company bought the debt. We're here to secure the mining infrastructure and liquidate the alien infestation that's damaging our property." I stared at him, the reality of the situation crashing over me. "You didn't come to save us." Knox looked at the terrified women and children, huddled behind me, then back to me. A slight grim smirk crossed his face. "You're the labor force, Ariston, and a mine doesn't run without labor," Knox said, racking the charging handle of his massive weapon. "Congratulations, you've just been acquired. Now stay out of the way while we clear the pests off our lawn." Survival under Blackbridge management was a masterclass in brutal industrialized efficiency. Within hours of the initial drop, the private military contractors had transformed our shattered surface courtyard into a heavily fortified forward operating base. They didn't build sandbag walls or string barbed wire. They deployed automated modular barricades dropped from Boeing-manufactured heavy lifters. Boston Dynamics quadruped combat, chassis sleek, dog-like machines, bristling with automated heavy machine guns, patrolled the perimeter. The sky above New Alexandria was a constant web of crisscrossing laser designators and the contrails of Northrop Grumman drone strikes. We, the surviving colonists, were herded into a triage zone. Sarah finally got her medical supplies, but they weren't handed out with compassion. A Blackbridge logistics officer, a stern woman named O'Connor, dumped crates of combat stims and synthetic blood onto Sarah's makeshift table, demanded a signature on a digital manifest, and walked away. "Every stim, every bandage, it's all being itemized," Thomas whispered to me as we watched a squad of heavily armored mercenaries march past, their boots striking the grated floor in perfect unison. "I hacked into their local network. They aren't billing the UN. They're adding it to our colony's debt ledger." "Let them," I replied, my voice raspy. "I'll sign whatever they want as long as the Krell don't eat my engineers." Captain Knox commanded the operation from a command tent erected over the remains of our colonial administration office. I found him there on the 4th day. He was standing over a holographic projection table powered by a Palantir tactical matrix. Knox spat a stream of black tobacco juice into an empty brass shell casing. He didn't look up as I entered. "Ariston," Knox grunted. "Your mining blueprints are a mess. Sector 7 shows a structural reinforcement that doesn't exist. Cost 2 of my men their legs when a tunnel collapsed. Sector 7 was retrofitted last year." I stepped forward, pointing at a cluster of thermal exhaust shafts on the hologram. "We diverted the budget to reinforce the geothermal taps instead. Why do you care about the lower levels?" "The surface is secure." Knox tapped a few keys on his wrist-mounted console. The map zoomed in on the deepest part of the mine, nearly 3 miles below the planet's surface. A massive, pulsing crimson anomaly dominated the projection. "The bugs aren't just trying to kill you," Knox said, his voice devoid of emotion. They're trying to nest. Our seismic sensors picked this up 12 hours ago. The Krell are pooling their biomass around your primary geothermal core. They're using the heat to incubate a Praetorian. I felt the blood drain from my face. A Praetorian was a myth, a boogeyman whispered about by deep space truckers. A heavily armored siege beast, the size of a commercial starship, designed to crack tectonic plates and plunge entire continents into volcanic winter. If that thing hatches, I stammered, the seismic shockwave will destabilize the fault line. The entire colony will collapse into the mantle. It's worse than that, Knox corrected, finally turning his cold, dead eyes toward me. The geothermal core is the single most valuable asset on this rock. If it melts down, the profit margins for this quadrant drop by 34%. Blackbridge Board of Directors will not allow a depreciation of company assets. So what's the plan? Bomb it? Orbital bombardment can't penetrate 3 miles of solid bedrock. Knox grabbed his massive General Dynamics rail cannon from a weapons rack. We have to deliver a payload manually, a localized tactical thermonuclear warhead. I need someone who knows the maintenance tunnels well enough to bypass the collapsed main shafts. Someone who can override the Siemens industrial safety locks on the blast doors. He stared at me. The implication hung heavy in the sterilized air of the command tent. You want me to go down there? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. With you? I don't want you to do anything, Ariston. I am ordering you. Knox replied, his tone chillingly casual. Page 4, subsection 12 of your new employment contract. Blackbridge retains the right to conscript local assets in the event of extreme facility distress. Grab a hard-hat engineer. We're going to hell. Descending into the abyss felt like walking down the throat of a dying god. Knox led a specialized strike team, 6 mercenaries clad in heavy environmental sealed power armor, carrying weapons that hummed with terrifying kinetic energy. A mechanized loader bot followed us, its hydraulic arms clutching a matte green cylinder the size of a water heater. The tactical nuke. I walked in the center of the formation, wearing a surplus Kevlar vest that felt like paper next to the Blackbridge armor. My only weapon was my modified rivet rifle, a pathetic toy compared to the arsenal surrounding me. The heat grew oppressive as we passed the 2-mile mark. The walls of the tunnel were coated in a thick, pulsating resin. The air smelled of sulfur and rotting meat. Thermal optics are useless. Corporal Miller, the squad's heavy weapons specialist, grunted over the local comms channel. Too much ambient heat from the resin. It's masking their signatures. Keep your heads on a swivel, Knox commanded. Ariston, how far to the primary pressure valve? 200 yards. I replied, consulting a ruggedized datapad. But there's a heavy security bulkhead blocking the entrance to the geothermal chamber. I'll need 3 minutes to slice the access panel. You have 1. Knox said. A horrific clicking sound echoed from the darkness ahead. It wasn't a single insect. It was the sound of thousands of chitinous legs scraping against stone. Contact front! Miller roared. The tunnel erupted into a slaughterhouse. Dozens of Krell drones poured from hidden vents in the ceiling and floor. Knox and his men didn't panic. They formed a tight, interlocking wall of armor and unleashed a hurricane of depleted uranium rounds. The muzzle flashes lit the dark tunnel like strobe lights at a macabre rave. Green blood sprayed across my visor as alien limbs were severed and carapaces were shattered. Push forward, Knox bellowed over the deafening roar of gunfire. Do not let them bog us down. We advanced through the meat grinder. The mercenaries moved with absolute precision, stepping over the twitching corpses of the Krell, firing in synchronized bursts. We reached the bulkhead. It was massive, a slab of reinforced steel sealed shut. Get to work, Ariston, Knox barked. shoving me toward the access panel as the squad formed a defensive semicircle around us. I tore the panel cover off my hands, shaking so violently I dropped my splicing tool. I forced myself to breathe. Wires, circuits. It's just a machine, I told myself. I connected my datapad to the mainframe fingers flying across the screen as I bypassed the corporate DRM locks and initiated a manual override. Behind me, the gunfire intensified. "We got a heavy," Miller screamed. I glanced over my shoulder. Tearing through the swarm of smaller Krell was a nightmare. A warrior caste, twice the size of the ones on the surface, armored in bone-white plating. It charged through the hail of bullets, shrugging off rounds that would have pulverized a tank. It swung a massive scythe-like appendage. The blade caught Corporal Miller square in the chest. The heavy ablative armor of his suit sparked and shrieked, but the sheer kinetic force threw him backward, smashing him into the cavern wall. "Miller's down!" O'Connor yelled, firing a shoulder-mounted Javelin micromissile. The explosive detonated against the Krell's face, staggering it, but not killing it. "Ariston! The door!" Knox roared. 30 seconds! I screamed back, sweat stinging my eyes. The white-armored Krell recovered, letting out a deafening roar. It locked its multi-eyed gaze onto the loader bot, carrying the nuclear payload. If it destroyed the bot, the mission was over. The colony was dead. I looked at my datapad. The decryption was at 80%. I looked up at the ceiling. Running directly over the Krell swarm was a massive insulated pipe, the primary coolant return line for the geothermal taps. It pumped sub-zero liquid nitrogen to keep the drills from melting. I dropped the datapad, grabbed my rivet rifle, and aimed upward. "Knox, get your men back!" I screamed. Knox didn't question me. He saw where I was aiming. "Fall back, seal your environmental suits." I pulled the trigger. The heavy industrial rivet tore through the air and slammed into the pressure valve of the coolant line. The pipe ruptured with a sound like a bomb detonating. A massive high-pressure geyser of liquid nitrogen blasted downward, cascading directly onto the white-armored Krell and the swarm surrounding it. The alien shrieked as the sub-zero liquid hit its superheated carapace. The rapid change in temperature caused the biological armor to instantly crystallize and crack. "Now," I yelled. Knox stepped forward. He leveled his rail cannon directly at the monster's structurally compromised chest plate and held the trigger down. The armor, brittle from the freezing cold, shattered like glass. The depleted uranium slugs tore through the creature's internal organs, blowing its back out in a geyser of green gore. It collapsed dead before it hit the floor. Behind me, the heavy steel bulkhead hissed and slowly began to slide open. The intense blinding orange light of the geothermal core spilled into the tunnel. "Payload secured," Knox grunted, slapping the side of the loader bot. He looked at me, a rare expression of mild approval on his scarred face. "Nice improvised engineering, Ariston." We pushed into the cavern. The heat was unbearable. Suspended over the bubbling lake of magma was the hive node, a massive, pulsing sack of biological tissue tethered to the rock walls by thick veins. Shadows moved within it. The Praetorian was almost ready. "Set the timer for 5 minutes," Knox ordered the loader bot. The machine dutifully clanked forward, depositing the nuclear warhead at the base of the resin structure and arming the detonator. "Job's done," Knox said, turning his back on the nightmare. "Let's move. We have a blast door to put between us and that bomb." We ran. We dragged Miller's unconscious body, his armor, sparking back through the butchered tunnel. We passed the bulkhead, just as the timer hit 30 seconds. I slammed my fist onto the emergency lock button. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing the geothermal chamber. We threw ourselves to the ground as the countdown reached 0. The explosion didn't sound loud. It was too deep, too immense. The entire planet seemed to ring like a struck bell. The shockwave hit the bulkhead, buckling the thick steel inward, but it held. The tunnel collapsed behind it, sealing the radioactive hellfire deep within the earth. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in a week, there was no screeching, no gunfire, just the heavy breathing of exhausted men. "Command, this is Captain Knox." Knox spoke into his wrist comms, his voice steady. "Target neutralized. Asset secured." We rode the industrial elevator back to the surface. The sky was still the color of bruises, but the air was clear of spores. The surviving colonists were emerging from the bunkers looking at the sky in disbelief. We had survived. I walked into the command tent, my clothes soaked in sweat and alien blood. Thomas was sitting at a terminal, looking over a digital document with a pale face. "Ariston," Thomas said, his voice trembling. They just transmitted the final invoice to my terminal. I walked over and looked at the screen. The number at the bottom of the ledger was astronomical. Billions of credits. Billed for the ordnance, dropped the fuel, spent the hazard pay of the mercenaries, and the administrative repossession fee. Knox stepped into the tent, wiping a smear of soot off his forehead. "You can't pay that," Knox said, looking at us. "Not in 100 lifetimes." "So what happens to us?" I asked, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach that rivaled the fear of the Krell. "Under interstellar salvage law, since your corporate sponsors defaulted, Blackbridge now owns this facility." Knox pulled a fresh pouch of chewing tobacco from his vest. "And since you owe us for the rescue, your labor contracts have been officially transferred to our subsidiary division." He tossed a small metallic badge onto the table. It bore the Lockheed Martin, Blackbridge Eagle. "You don't work for Aegis Mining anymore, Ariston." Knox said, a grim smile finally touching his lips. "You work for us. Shift starts at 0600 tomorrow. We have a lot of rebuilding to do, and time is money." I looked at the badge, then out the window, at the heavily armed mercenaries patrolling the perimeter. We hadn't been saved. We had been bought. The monsters in the dark had been defeated, only to be replaced by the monsters in the boardrooms. But as I watched a young child run into the arms of her mother in the courtyard below, I picked up the badge. We were alive. In the cold, unforgiving expanse of the galaxy, humanity didn't survive on hope or prayer. We survived on cold, hard steel and the ruthless pursuit of the bottom line, and for now that was enough. If you loved this gritty, adrenaline-fueled dive into corporate sci-fi warfare, smash that like button. It really helps the channel survive the algorithm. What did you think of Captain Knox and Blackbridge's ruthless tactics? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow sci-fi fans and hit subscribe with the bell icon turned on so you never miss our next HFY adventure. See you in the next drop, soldiers.